Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming. I'd ask you all to move as far forward as you're comfortable. In front of the cameras would be best. Okay. Those of you in the Witness Protection Program are allowed to stay in the back. I'm Lisa Loomis, editor of the Valley Reporter, and I have the privilege of moderating today's debate with two Harwood Union students, Christy Milne and Derek Lowe. Both will be seniors at Harwood next year, and both are active in the Future Business Leaders of America. Christy is the president of the Vermont State Chapter of FBLA, and Derek is the president of the Harwood Chapter. Please join me in welcoming Christy and Derek, as well as their fellow FBLA members. We're sponsored today by Harwood Union, Future Business Leaders of America, the Mad River Valley Chamber of Commerce, MRV TV, and the Valley Reporter. The format for today's debate includes a 90-second opening statement from each of the 5 Democratic candidates for Vermont governor. Christy, Derek, and I will ask a series of candidates who will have 60 seconds to answer. Candidates, please notice the young woman with the 2 flags right here in the front row, with the yellow flag and the red flag. The yellow flag means you have 10 seconds to stop talking, and the red flag means that's it. Candidates will begin in alphabetical order, and the first respondent will be rotated alphabetically down the table. I understand you're all familiar with this format. FBLA students will be in the aisles to collect questions from audience members, and there were 3x5 cards out on the front table and pencils for you to ask questions. Before we begin, please turn off your cell phones on the off chance anybody gets service here. Please join me in welcoming the Democratic candidates for Vermont governor: State Senator Susan Bartlett, businessman Dunne, Vermont Secretary of State Deb Markowitz, State Senator Doug Racine, and State Senator Peter Shumlin. Thank you for coming. Susan, to you falls the honor of the first opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming on a really nice sunny day. And I think, first of all, it's congratulations to your lacrosse team. Did a nice job. But I understand the boys' track team also took a state championship this year. And not to be outdone, that your girls' golf team, that is apparently quite small but very mighty, has also taken a state championship. And I just wanted to, in terms of the girls' golf team, it's a time-honored tradition that both the House and the Senate raise money in the summer by having a golf game, and we have all the lobbyists come. So I think, the girls might be able to rent themselves out to the House and Senate to put in a couple of ringers for playing. They can, goodness knows the senators and the reps need some help playing golf. I'm Susan Bartlett. I'm the senator from Lamoille County, just up the road here a little way. I have been in the Senate for 18 years. I've been on the Appropriations Committee for 16 of those years and chair for a number of it. I decided to run for governor because I do understand the problems that we are facing as a state. When you're chair of appropriations, you end up not only understanding all the money and the finances of the state, but you understand all the policy that goes with it. Vermont and the country, as we all know, are in very difficult times. We're in better shape than most, but we're going to need some people that know what they're doing to get us going in the right direction.
I too would like to thank you all for coming out today on this beautiful day to be a part of the political process, because this election year is an important one. Because what Vermonters know across the state, what we're doing now is not working. And I would also like to thank you for involving Future Business Leaders of America, because the fact is that the number one issue we are facing now is the economy and jobs, and it's not about the economy and jobs for next year or the year after. It's the economy and jobs for generations to come. We are facing challenges unlike anything we have seen. We have the biggest budget deficit in our state's history. We have unemployment on the rise and underemployment significantly on the rise. People going from a 40-hour-a-week job to 30 to 20 without benefits. We have young people leaving our state en masse. We have a nuclear power plant that is leaking tritium into the groundwater of the state of Vermont, and we have the cost of health care going up $1 million a day, affecting small businesses, school boards, the State Budget Committee, with everything that they do. The good news is that people in Vermont are not giving up, they're not whining, they're not complaining. They're coming forward with fresh new ideas to be able to move us into the future. And it's at forums like these that we get to hear from you and share those ideas that we are hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I add my thanks for you all coming in on this gorgeous sunny day. I've been Secretary of State for 12 years, and I'm a mom of 3 kids. And so what this is all about for me is making sure that Vermont stays the best place to live and to work and to raise a family. And right now we've got 23,000 Vermonters out of work. So in the first instance, it means we've got to get those folks back to work. We've got to jumpstart our economy in Vermont. And I have learned from my years as Secretary of State, and frankly from being a mom as well, that it's not going to happen unless we change the way we do things in Montpelier. We've got to become a whole lot less partisan and political, and a whole lot more practical as a state. I've worked with every community leader in every town of Vermont. I've worked with small businesses across the state. And so I know that top-down answers for Montpelier, one-size-fits-all solutions, rarely work. And I bring that to this race for governor. I'll bring that to the governor's office, this real understanding of our communities across the state. I've done the right thing for the state of Vermont for the last 12 years. I'm going to do that again as governor. For me, that means making sure we get a handle on health care, making sure that we're transforming our society to a clean energy economy, and taking care of our veterans, because they've earned benefits and they've got a right to the care that they've worked so hard for.
Hi, good afternoon. Again, thank you for being here on a beautiful afternoon. My name is Doug Racine. I am currently a state senator. I've been lieutenant governor, a state senator before that, and I'm also owner with my 2 brothers of a small business, so I really understand what's going on in this economy right now because times are tough. I'm running for governor because I want Vermont and Vermonters to realize our real potential as a state. And I think we've got incredible potential as our businesses, as families, as communities, as the state of Vermont. And it's all built on the foundation of a strong economy. That is going to be job number 1 for the next governor. We've got incredible assets in this state to build upon, to realize that potential, and to give every family, every child in this state, a really good opportunity. I grew up in Vermont with great opportunities out there in front of me, a great future that my parents believed in, and I want families to believe the same thing for their kids. In this campaign, I've been all over the state, all 4 corners of the state, and I'm finding that Vermonters are really ready to move forward. And they're looking for a little partnership from the state of Vermont to help them move. And whether it's the farmers out there who are struggling on their dairy farms or are looking to diversify into organic or beef or something else, I'm finding those farmers are there and they want the state of Vermont to help them. I visited here at Sugarbush and down at Mount Snow, businesses that are ready to grow. Vermont is poised to really move forward and move forward in a strong way. That's why I want to be governor, is to make that happen.
Hi, I'm Pete Shumlin, currently the President of the Senate. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks to Derek and Christy for giving us their time on a Sunday, and to all of you for coming out. I was born and raised in Windham County, and I'm the father of 2 wonderful daughters. My story is not unlike the folks that I want to make opportunities for if you elect me governor. I was born and raised in a family that started a small business in a cow barn out back called Putney Student Travel. We send educational summer programs for high school students all over the world. When I graduated from college, I wanted nothing more than to come back to Vermont, raise a family, make a good living, and live in the best state in the world. I did that, had some success, met some luck, and as a business person and someone who is a proven leader, having been elected 5 times by my colleagues as Senate President, I believe I'm the candidate that can beat Brian Doobie. Why do I say that? Because I can get tough things done. Now, all politicians say I get tough things done. So don't judge me on what I'm going to tell you I might do. I ask you to judge me on what I've done. In the last 12 months, I saw wrong and righted it by introducing the first marriage equality bill in the country to pass legislatively. When the Doobie-Douglas team vetoed it, we collectively overrode that veto and made Vermont first in civil rights. I led the fight to shut down the aging, polluting nuclear power plant down in my county that's run by folks we can't trust. Vermont has a bright future, and I look forward to talking to you more about that this afternoon. So thanks so much for being here.
Thank you all very much. The first question, we will begin with Matt, and I'm going to ask you all to hold your applause now until the end, exciting though this may be. It's been over a decade since the Vermont Supreme Court ruled that all Vermont students are entitled to equal educational opportunity. The legislature passed Act 60 and Act 68 in response to that decision. Given the impact of Vermont's education funding system on resort towns, and given the unequal test performance of Vermont students, despite the more equal educational funding, how would you rate Act 60 and 68, and what would you do to improve them?
So I had the dubious honor and distinction of having been in the legislature for both Act 60 and Act 68, and when I was in the House as well as in the Senate, I represented a resort town, West Windsor, where Mount Ascutney resides. And there was a fundamental principle that I felt was critical as we move forward with that legislation, was that we did not do distribution across the board in property taxes unless we made sure that we fundamentally shifted the way that we pay for education to ability to pay. I felt that was critical to make sure that we had the kind of vertical equity, the kind of opportunities that people who were struggling would be able to be okay with their homestead exemption, as well as that indexing to ability to pay. I fought for that. I voted against earlier legislation that didn't have it, and I've been disturbed to see that changing today. I believe the changes that must happen are that we reduce costs by consolidating supervisory unions, not consolidating schools, and by getting rid of the CLA, which I believe does more harm than good.
As Secretary of State, I've had the opportunity to actually visit almost every school in our state. I have a civics education program that I developed along with educators in Vermont. And I started visiting in 1999 when I was first elected. And I'll tell you, I saw a real difference, a real change in our schools from the effect of Act 60. So we should feel proud about that. But it has been a number of years. And when I go visit schools today, what I find is I'll come to some schools and the students are really engaged. They're ready with questions, they're ready to learn. And I'll go to other schools and there's disinterest. They don't even look me in the eye when I come into their classrooms. And that's a problem. To me, this tells me that the challenge we have right now isn't about money, it's about educational leadership. We cannot leave our kids behind. We do have issues with cost, and as a governor, I'm going to address it. In my proposal, we would be reducing administrative costs by reducing the number of supervisory unions. I've got a whole bunch of other things in my plan I'm happy to talk about later. Thank you.
I was in the Lieutenant Governor's office when the Brigham decision came down, and I think that the response was the correct response to a court decision. But since then, I've also been very willing to listen, and to listen to how these changes are affecting communities. The income sensitivity provisions in Act 60 were developed in my office of Lieutenant Governor by working with people and understanding that this law was going to have a pretty big impact on people, and it needed to be income sensitized. I continue to listen. I think after 12 years of this law being in place, starting with Act 60 and then Act 68 revisions, it's time for a real thoughtful review of it, because I keep hearing people say there are inequities in it. It's maybe not giving us all of the results that we had anticipated. It's not easily understood by our voters, so I think it's time to take a look at it. But I'm going to say the fundamental foundation of equal opportunity has to be in place. The provisions of Brigham will still have to be adhered to.
I come from Windham County, where we have Stratton, Mount Snow, Bromley, and lots of ski mountains. And I have been a supporter of equity. I think the simple principle that we have in Vermont, that when a community chooses to spend $6,000, they make the same effort as every other community in Vermont that makes that same choice. And if they choose to spend $12,000 per pupil, they will spend twice as much, and the same amount, the same effort as every community that makes that choice is a good principle, and we should be proud of it. Having said that, there are 3 things that I will do differently than the current administration as your governor. The first is I'll end the war of words against our school children, our teachers, and our school boards, and work collaboratively with them to solve our problems. Second, I will pass a single-payer healthcare system that reduces healthcare costs and takes the burden off the backs of hard-paying property taxpayers who are feeling lots of pain. And third, I will help to lead a consolidation effort with superintendencies, not a mandated consolidation effort from Montpelier as this administration has proposed.
Thank you, candidates.
Whoa.
Sorry, Susan.
I'm always glad to avoid Act 60 because I represent Stowe. The question is, have Act 60 and Act 68 worked? Yes, they have worked. Is it time to look seriously at them and make changes? Yes, it is. I've been a proponent for some time, actually, before I went into the Senate, and I have a background in education. I believe our administrative districts should each be centered around a technical center. Which comes out to sort of being close to counties. There was some work being done last year on a bill, and I am certain that will be followed through with next year, that takes that idea and expands and says, all right, how about if each of those regions, now we try to keep most of the funding in that region within that region. And that you do regional appraisals on a 3-year rotating level that gets rid of the all-confusing, nobody understands common level of appraisal. Then we really have to get to controlling costs in special education. I believe property taxes are hurting all of us. It isn't just in these, as they used to be called, gold towns, and we definitely need to make some changes.
The next question. How does climate change influence your policy positions, if at all, and what are you going to do about it? Are you familiar with the Nature Conservancy's report on climate change in the Champlain Basin, and what do you intend to do about the findings? In light of the economic crisis Vermont faces, where on your priority list do you place dealing with climate change? Got all those?
Yeah, it's a good question for 60 seconds. I'll tell you, climate change is something that we really need to take seriously as a state. If we believe we want to continue to make maple syrup into the future, it's critical, not to mention the fact that our growing seasons are changing and so forth. I've got an energy plan that I'll be talking about more during the course of the campaign. And it's focused on moving off of our dependence on fossil fuels to other renewable energies. For example, I'm a strong supporter of cogeneration, where we use biomass to provide both heat and electric to more urban areas like Montpelier, Randolph, Brattleboro, where there's a cluster of population. The biggest challenge in Vermont, though, is 2 places. It's less electricity, and it's heat and it's transportation. We have a great northern forest that could be used for pellets, and that could help jumpstart our economy. And of course, for transportation, we have an opportunity to think again about public transportation, the way we get people around town, and the way we develop our communities, thinking about global warming so that you could walk or bike to where you need to go.
I think climate change is one of the defining issues facing us all as Americans, and I'm really disappointed that somehow, because of the moneyed interest in Washington, that Congress has not dealt with it in a truly comprehensive and meaningful way. Having said that, there are things that we can do here in Vermont, and Vermont has always shown the lead in so many different areas, and it's time for Vermont to show the lead once again. It is about dependency upon fossil fuels and oil, and it's not just about climate change, it's also about the Gulf of Mexico and other places around the world. We are having an unconscionable impact on future generations through our use of fossil fuels. We as a state can lead the way. We can show the rest of America that we can deal with our energy needs, our energy demands, through conservation and efficiency to reduce those demands, and then by aggressively moving to renewable energy. We can build a renewable energy industry in the state of Vermont if we have a state policy which says we are going to embrace these technologies. Those companies will grow here and will lead the nation.
I believe that getting off of our addiction to oil is the primary importance of the next governor's job. And getting a piece of the job creation that's going to come as our economy transforms to a non-oil-based economy. Again, I ask you to judge me on my record, not on my rhetoric. When I came back as Senate President 4 years ago, I said that climate change was the #1 issue facing Vermont. We brought together the leaders of climate change education in the country, Emory Levins, Bill McKibben, many others, and had the entire legislature for the first 3 weeks of the session sit down and just learn about the challenge. From that, and by the way, the Doobie Douglas team called that a batik issue, focusing on climate change. From that, we passed what Al Gore called, it was my bill, the toughest climate change bill in the country, which this team vetoed. It would have made Vermont #1 on efficiency, conserving our resources, and I will do that as governor. We will move, as under the Shumlin administration, to the most aggressive solar, 30% solar in 15 years, wind, biomass, and small hydro in the country, and we'll get a piece of the job creation that's going to come from that extraordinary opportunity.
Boy, climate change in 90 seconds? 60 seconds. Whew. You really can, as a state, have a profound impact. And it really is with the policies that you have in place about how we use energy and the kind of energy that we use. Simply understanding that electric motors are more efficient than other motors means, gee, maybe talking about electric cars isn't quite so funny. Maybe that really does make a lot of sense for significantly changing the carbon footprint of everybody that lives in this state. And maybe the state should lead that by getting seriously into electric cars as a model and showing folks that it really, really works. What is going to happen to our ski areas? How do we diversify? What happens to our agriculture? Now in the Champlain Valley, you have to, every time you go hiking and you take the dog with you, you want to make sure you check for ticks. Besides gigantic issues, there are a lot of health issues that deal with climate change that we aren't used to thinking of as Vermonters. We need to have some serious discussions and statewide policies that show that we're really serious about this.
Climate change is the crisis of this generation. And it doesn't take seeing the disaster in the Gulf to know that if we do not take steps now to move away from fossil fuels and things that affect fundamentally the weather patterns that we have, that we will be in a dangerous place in the not too distant future. Vermont actually has the brand to be able to lead the rest of the country. And we have it at our institutions of higher education, whether it's UVM, or Middlebury, or Little Green Mountain College, to be able to be on the cutting edge of innovation, to be able to create the jobs that can lead the way out of this crisis we are facing. It's bringing those individuals and those fresh ideas to the table, whether it's doing the biggest energy efficiency investment in the country, whether it's making sure we're investing in biomass and solar at an aggressive rate, or it's moving to electric cars, which would mean 35 cents per gallon for our commuters. Those are the fresh ideas that brought people like Bill McKibben to endorse my campaign. And I will be proud to be the governor that moves us to lead the country in climate change. Thank you.
All right, candidates. The next question is, what do you see as the greatest obstacle to overcome in Vermont during your governor years?
Greatest obstacles? Well, the toughest obstacle we're facing right now is the national economy and asking ourselves what we can do about it here in Vermont. And I'm excited when I'm talking to Vermonters and Vermont businesses about the potential of Vermont. I said it in my opening remarks. Vermont is poised and is ready to really move forward in many different ways: renewable energy, agriculture, tourism, manufacturing, entrepreneurship. And what I'm hearing from all of them is what they want the government to do, and what they want the next governor to do, is to focus on the fundamentals that will be important for every business and every family in this state. Maintain our quality of life here. That is absolutely essential if we are going to continue to have our competitive edge for our products, for our travel industry, for the entrepreneurs who want to raise their families here. Improve the quality of our infrastructure, and that's got to include broadband and cell phone access, and maintain and improve the quality of our workforce so that as businesses grow, we've got the right kind of employees for them to grow with.
The biggest obstacle facing Vermont is job creation. And there are two people that I worry about, two groups of people. The first is the unemployed, the folks who have lost their jobs in this extraordinary recession. The second is the much larger group, those who are underemployed, have a job, but find their incomes are stagnant, their bills are mounting, and they just can't keep up. I have a 4-point plan to create jobs. First, a healthcare system, the first in the country, where health insurance follows you, not your employer. That will create jobs, and if we're the first state in the country where businesses can come and health insurance is not the burden of the employer, that's a huge jobs creator. Second, broadband internet access, as Doug just mentioned, every dirt mile, I'll get it there by 2013. That's a promise I will meet. Third, retrain our existing workforce. And fourth, get a piece of the climate change jobs with a partnership with higher education and our tech schools that allows Vermont to be at the cutting edge of this extraordinary economic opportunity.
I think the first most challenging thing that we have to do in Vermont is to change the image that this administration has presented to everyone that Vermont is unfriendly to business. One of the things that you learn as we travel around the state as individuals, talking to individuals and businesses, there are all kinds of businesses out there of all sizes that are growing, that are ready to do more growth, and happen to think we're a great place to do business. So I'm going to start by saying, yay, Vermont is terrific for business. And next of all, we really, and the challenge will be comprehensive health care. If we succeed in comprehensive health care, that will lower tremendous costs to individuals, to school budgets, to businesses, and to state government. That will free up dollars. Besides giving every individual a security that most of us can't even imagine, it will free up millions of dollars that can be used in much more constructive ways in the state.
I would agree that the most challenging thing we will do is to tackle healthcare costs. It's driving everything across our state. It was $70 million out of the $150 million deficit. But I would say that the biggest challenge we have is to think different about how we do economic development. Because, and I may differ from the other folks in this race, I believe Vermont has all the potential in the world to create jobs and to have a world-class economy. I've benefited from that working for Google today and growing a company elsewhere. But we do not have the infrastructure to allow people to succeed. It doesn't take looking at our roads that don't have bike lanes, bridges we drop into Lake Champlain, the fact that we don't have we're 50th in cell service and broadband. We do not currently have the infrastructure to allow us to grow those jobs, to help those entrepreneurs to grow. And the businesses that I talk to are optimistic. They know we can get there. We have the best workforce, the best quality of life. But unless we do the investment in that infrastructure, we will not be able to realize that full potential.
Well, I guess I'd say I absolutely agree that updating our infrastructure is going to be essential to jumpstart the economy in Vermont. But I guess I'd go further than that, and I would say that when I've talked to businesses around Vermont, we've got a lot of existing businesses that are ready to grow, but they tell me they have a hard time getting access to the capital they need. We've bailed out Wall Street, but it hasn't trickled down to Main Street. So one of the first things I'm going to do as governor is really put pressure on our banks to make those needed loans again, both for startup capital, but also for the working capital that our businesses need to grow and to begin to hire again. I'm going to speak back to that false choice we've been given from this past administration and the Republicans, that every time we protect our environment, we're doing it at the expense of businesses, because I know we're going to succeed as a state precisely because of our assets. And I'm going to take advantage of those assets and market Vermont as a great place to live and work and raise a family. I'm going to focus on getting Vermont to make things again. Clean energy, software, specialty food products, that's going to be part of my economic plan. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. Your fourth question. What ideas do you have and what efforts would you make in welcoming and growing business in Vermont, while at the same time respecting and upholding Vermont's natural beauty and landscape?
Well, Christy, I believe that there is often provided by this administration a false choice between protecting our natural resources and growing jobs. Listen, the greatest asset that Vermont has is our quality of life. I ask you to raise your hand if you would like to live anywhere else on this planet. This is a great place to do business. And by protecting our natural resources and growing jobs simultaneously, we have a really bright future. This is where the jobs are going to come from. Not only energy, but I believe Vermont has a bright ag future. I own a dairy farm. I can tell you that if we can get our farmers the value-added price, if we can get our goods sold locally, if we can tap into the Montreal, New York, and Boston markets, when it becomes less possible to import a tomato from Chile and a gallon of milk from Wisconsin, our farmers have a bright future with the right governor putting infrastructure in place so they get the value-added product. So food, farming, energy, manufacturing again, and I believe we have a really bright jobs future while we protect our natural resources.
At one of these forums somewhere along the line, or something we were asked to fill out, we were asked to give our definition of the green economy, because everybody talks about the green economy, and we're definitely all in favor of the green economy, and I had to sit down and say, what is the green economy? And it made me realize that the green economy is the future of jobs in this state and how it ties into the environment. I believe that the green economy is the current way of saying that you need to, you use it, you reuse it, you don't throw it out, you recycle, you make do with what you have. And it is in that innovation of how do we not just do renewable energy, but all the innovation that goes into this wind turbine is so efficient you can't believe it, and getting a patent on that. So it isn't just building the wind turbines, it's having the intellectual property that makes that work. It's about cleaning up Lake Champlain and being serious about it, and all the innovation, the intellectual and innovation that will come with that, that will create not only jobs, but will create technology that will belong to this state.
We need to have a diversified economy in the state, and we need to have the infrastructure to support it. We need to have a vibrant agriculture sector. We need to have a boutique manufacturing sector. We need to make sure that we're leading on green jobs, and we need to make sure we have a vibrant travel and tourism industry with the quality of life that goes with that. In order to do that, we need to make sure that we have the infrastructure and are not dead last in internet connectivity. We need to make sure that we're investing in higher education to bring ideas from the classroom to the global marketplace and not be dead last in our investment in higher education per capita. And we need to make sure we have access to capital, both capital to grow businesses, but also microfinance. So people who are unemployed can come and create their own small businesses and build a middle class. I actually disagree with some of my colleagues when they went after Brian Doobie for saying that we were 47th out of 50th in business environment. Because the fact is, we need improvement, but more importantly, I want Brian Doobie to define this race that way. Because my question to him is, where have you been? Thank you.
We've got a great opportunity in Vermont to be leaders again in many areas. In my economic plan, I'm going to be focusing not just on helping our existing businesses grow and thrive, but to capitalize on the things that make us unique as a state to make us a leader in clean energy manufacturing. We already have some of the leading companies in the country, but there are other areas as well. Software development, biotech, high-tech, specialty food products, niche tourism. I did a tour recently of southern Vermont and met with some incredibly innovative business owners. And you know why they're here? They're here because they like our quality of life. A software company that could have landed anywhere in the country chose down by Marlborough because they like the access to the ski areas. There's a new winery that's putting together an inn that also has a culinary school for culinary tourism. That's the kind of innovation that I'll be looking for and supporting as governor. And that's what's going to bring us forward as a state economically.
I'm going to state flatly that our economy is absolutely dependent upon our natural beauty and our environmental quality of life. We've been doing it for many, many years. We have found the ability to grow jobs in this state, to attract tourists, to attract entrepreneurs, and maintain our quality of life. But it doesn't happen by accident. And as governor, I'm going to change the conversation. I want to remind Vermonters who might have forgotten and to reinforce the feelings of the rest of us that environmental quality of life does not happen by accident. It's not just because we happen to be living in Vermont. It comes through leadership, and it comes through public policies which guarantee that we will maintain that quality of life. I've been doing this for over 20 years in my time in the legislature and my time in state government. Everything from closing down leaking landfills, which were polluting our groundwater, to putting in place the Housing and Conservation Trust Fund, which has increased the amount of land that we are conserving in this state. We can do it. In the Mad River Valley, you know how essential it is. You've been doing it for years.
Thank you, candidates. This next question is a two-part question, and it takes advantage of a question I received from someone in the audience, which I will read first. The Civil Union Law in 2000 and the Marriage Equality Law of 2009 gave the state a unique opportunity to increase tourism, yet the Department of Tourism has done little to nothing to promote Vermont as a gay wedding market. Individual businesses and local tourism groups have taken the lead. What will you do to get the state to take the lead in competing for this lucrative niche market? And my question to go with that is, earlier this year, Tom Cavett, an economist who consults with the Joint Fiscal Office for the Vermont Legislature, explained that several states, including Connecticut, Colorado, and others, were deeply cutting state funding for tourism marketing and had not experienced any corresponding reduction in visitors. Given the budgetary challenges facing the state, do you believe there are opportunities for savings in the state's marketing budget?
I defer to you, Madam Chair.
This is when you're chair of the Budget Committee and everybody goes, what do you want to do, Susan? Senate Appropriations has a long history of putting more money into the travel and tourism budget because we appreciate how important those dollars are to generating not just direct, but all the indirect impact that we get from tourism in this state. And clearly, tourism is a very important part, and I expect always will be, I hope it always will be, an important part of our economy. Yes, they put no money into marketing Vermont as for more of the lucrative wedding business, specifically for equal marriage. But I don't know that that's really necessary. There's a lot of marketing that goes on because a long time before this, folks realized in this state that the wedding industry is a giant industry and that from the large areas around us, we have tremendous number of folks that can come up and have a magnificent wedding in this state at about half the cost that they can in Boston or New York or in Canada. So I don't think we need to do anything in addition. I think the market takes care of itself pretty well.
My father was a civil rights activist who went to jail standing up for civil rights. And so when I was asked, when I was in the legislature in 1996, well before the Baker decision, if I believed that gay marriage was right, I said absolutely, and have been an advocate ever since. And that came from a moral and values place. But it doesn't take long in business to know that in fact being tolerant is good for business. It's a part of the economy, certainly in tourism, and we should promote it more. We have that niche, and we see other states going in the wrong direction. If we can create some revenue because of that, we should do it. But it's also important for all businesses. And Richard Florida, who wrote one of the most important books about the emerging economy, said that where there is tolerance, there is jobs. So we must be able to share that we are a state that's about how hard you work and what you do, not about your personal life and relationships. We can be that state and lead the nation. And what we need to do is not go backwards, since Brian Doobie ran the first time against civil rights for all Vermonters.
Well, I had the good fortune as Secretary of State after civil unions was passed to be the person who implemented it for the state. I wrote a little booklet about it and actually wrote the ceremony, and then I actually did do some marketing for the state of Vermont. I sent it to all of the gay newspapers and all of the gay websites around the country to try to let folks know that we were a place that was friendly to them, that they could come and enjoy this historic change, this historic right, civil unions, because we were, of course, the first in the nation. Of course, as governor, I'm going to do what's right for the state of Vermont, and in our marketing plan, to the extent that we bring in business to the state in a gay marriage wedding market, we ought to be advertising for it. But this is a great question because it shows something that makes me different than the rest. Of all the people in the race, I'm the only one who's actually managed government. I've written a budget, I've had to go and defend it to the legislature, and then I've managed it. And when I do that, I demand results. So I wouldn't have a tourism budget without knowing whether or not it works. That's the first thing I'll do as governor, is to make sure when we're spending money, we're getting our money's worth.
Matt, I'm glad you mentioned that Brian Doobie, when he ran the first time, ran against civil unions. I was the guy he was running against. I was lieutenant governor, he tried to take me out on that issue. And that's because not only was I a supporter of it, I was a leader of it, and I was one of the earliest leaders. And I was proud to be there. I was proud to have Brian Doobie fight against me. Obviously, I won that one. And I was proud to be there for marriage equality this year. But we've got to move beyond the word tolerance. I think that's part of the problem, to acceptance and inclusiveness. And I'm proud of what we've done in Vermont. And as governor, I'm going to find ways to let the rest of the country know that we are proud and we are welcoming. And that will bring more people into this state. There were efforts this year to try to cut the travel and tourism budget. I'm on the Economic Development Committee, worked with that committee. Susan chaired the Appropriations Committee. Between the two committees, we fought back on that because we understand that the state of Vermont's marketing is about our brand. It's doing the things that individual businesses and individual industries can't do. It is really important for Vermont to tell the story of the whole state of Vermont. And then the individual businesses and sectors out there will advertise for their individual needs. We need to keep that up.
To answer your question, the reason that the Doobie-Douglas team has not used this opportunity of being the first state in the nation to pass marriage equality without a court order is because they opposed the bill. I was the sponsor of the bill. We passed it, and again, it's another example of getting tough things done. If you think that there were Democrats and Republicans lining up outside the Senate President's door and the Speaker's door saying, hey, we got a great idea, let's pass marriage equality, guess again. We did it because it was the right thing to do. Brian Doobie wants to repeal that bill, and he certainly doesn't want to market it as a way to sell Vermont. I will as governor. Other thing I will do as governor is be one of the governors in the country, probably the only one, who will go to any state, anytime, and tell spineless politicians that they have nothing to fear to pass the last civil rights struggle left in America. We're in a nation where, from Barack Obama to Brian Doobie, you can discriminate publicly against the LGBT community and your numbers go up in the polls. That's enough reason to pass the bill, override the governor's veto, and fight for civil rights across this country, and we'll get it done as governor.
Thank you, candidates. If you had to end your campaign for governor today, would you endorse one of the other 4 candidates for the Democratic nomination, and if so, who?
This is mine first?
Yeah, good for you, Matt.
Matt, say me. Yeah, say you. I'll be taking offers quickly from the other candidates. I just wanted, what I think is critically important, and I think that I've heard this from all the candidates, that our goal is to make sure we have a change in direction in the state, and that we cannot go forward as a state in a positive direction if we have a continuation, much less someone who goes directly in opposition to the values of the state of Vermont. And I can say with confidence that I will stand there on August 25th to support whoever has emerged from this primary. I am believing and confident it will be me, but if it's anyone else here, I will be there. And that's because we cannot afford to go backwards. We can't be dead last in our infrastructure to support job creation, and we cannot go backwards on civil rights. There are too many states, whether it's Maine or New York or even California, that have gone backwards. We must be a state that continues to lead the way. We will not unless we defeat Brian Doobie in November.
This is a great question. You know, the five of us have gotten to know each other pretty well as we travel the state together having these forums. And I'll tell you that we are all of one mind about the need to make sure that there is change in Montpelier. We've had 8 years with no plan, 8 years with no vision for the state. And, you know, as Democrats, we share similar views. We all believe in healthcare reform and strengthening our schools and so forth. The good news is that there will be change come November. We're going to get a new governor. And it is my hope, and I'm working hard to make sure that it's a Democrat. After the primary, I'm expecting all of us will endorse whoever is the winner so that we can together beat Brian Doobie. But meanwhile, I'm really focusing on building the strongest campaign possible. We have folks, we've got organizers in the South and in the North. We're raising money as hard as we can. In fact, I'm proud to say we've raised money from over 2,000 Vermonters already, 1,200 of whom have given $50 or less. So we're off to a strong start. Thank you.
I think it's becoming obvious that we aren't going to answer that question, except to say that we're all going to, whoever wins will get the support of the other four. But I'm not entertaining the idea of getting out or endorsing anybody else, and I think we're all probably in that very same position, in all fairness to all of us. But what I'm doing is building my campaign so that I can win a primary and I can beat Brian Doobie come November. And I'm really proud of the progress of my campaign, and I think it's a winning campaign. And I'm really pleased that so many people are getting on board. I picked up a couple of key endorsements this past week, the Vermont NEA and the AFL-CIO. I've got the endorsements of 33 or 34 of my legislative colleagues. I've got 200 volunteers who are actively involved in this campaign. And so I'm building a campaign that's going to help me win the primary, but it's also going to put me in a very strong position the next day with the other four there with me, I hope, to beat Brian Doobie come November.
And I'm not going to answer your question either. But at least, you know, I do think that one of the qualities of being a good governor is that sometimes you're not going to answer the question. Thank you.
I believe Senator Shumlin has summed it up perfectly.
Thank you, candidates.
Thank you very much.
Your seventh question. Please explain your personal belief system as it pertains to your ability to lead and thus maintain a healthy, productive, and strong community in Vermont.
Well, my whole career has been focused on community. I believe in building strong communities. I think that's what makes Vermont the best place to live and to work and to raise a family. I got into politics from a position I held with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. I started their law center. And as Secretary of State, I've worked with local leaders in every town in Vermont. I've worked with small businesses across the state, and I've learned the power of individuals to make a real difference. So I've devoted a lot of my career as Secretary of State inspiring others to get involved, whether it was through a women's leadership initiative encouraging women to run for office, or going to schools to talk about civics education and the power that individuals have to make change. I take that to heart. I've taught my kids that. We live that life in our family, this belief that each of us has some responsibility to make the world a better place, and it starts at home.
Well, there are a couple aspects of personal belief system that I want to bring to this job. One is that all kids should get an opportunity to succeed, and that means starting with our youngest children, giving them the help they need so that they can have a good education and have fully developed opportunities as adults. The other part of it comes from something that my mother taught me. 2 ears, 1 mouth, use them proportionately. I really do try to listen to people, describe what their problems are, and look for solutions. And my personal system, my belief system, as I approach these problems, is that by listening, we can build consensus. Vermonters want state government to work. They don't want to see partisan bickering. They don't want to see a lot of back and forth. They want to see people working well together. We passed a health care bill. I'm waiting for the health care question. But we passed a health care bill this year. It came out of the committee I chair, the Senate Health and Welfare Committee, and it got through the Senate on a 28-2 vote. We built consensus to get that done. That's what Vermonters want to see.
I think the main ingredient that I think would guide me as governor in terms of my values is this simple belief that it is the job of government to level the playing field between those that have and those that have not. And that's why I'm in public service. I think the leadership question is really important. I was listening to NPR 3 days ago driving up the highway. We all spend a lot of time on the highways. And they were analyzing the recent primaries. And they were saying, it's going to be a tough year for incumbents all over the country. And I thought to myself, they're wrong. It's going to be a tough year for politicians that won't take off on tough issues, that won't provide leadership, that won't take a stand, that won't get things done. One thing about Pete Shumlin is I get tough things done, and I do it by bringing people together to address really difficult problems. That's why I'll beat Brian Doobie, and that's why we can win this campaign. People won't always agree with me, but I think more than ever, Vermonters want politicians who stand for what they believe, and I will and I do.
I was very fortunate to have a really good family. And so I think in terms of personal values, the fundamental things that my folks gave me was that you have a responsibility to give back. You have a responsibility to judge each individual as an individual. You have a responsibility to be fair. You have a responsibility to work hard. And you have a responsibility to be honest, even when it doesn't make you popular. And that really is what leadership is about. It's about being honest when it doesn't make you popular.
I grew up in a small town called Heartland. My father, as I mentioned, was a civil rights activist who believed to his core in equal rights, and my mom was one of the first women to go through tenure track at Dartmouth and led the way for women to be empowered at that particular institution of higher education. But it was the community that I grew up in that left me with my values. My father died when I was 13, and it was that community that essentially raised me. Got me and my brother to and from school, made sure we didn't have to cook for 2 months. And it was that same community that when I was 22 and just back from college that asked me to go to Montpelier to serve them in the legislature. And they didn't do it because I knew anything. Those of you like Judy who knew me then know that I didn't know anything. They did it because they knew I would work hard, I would bring the Vermont value of service, and that I would spend every day making sure we live the Vermont tradition of making sure that every person, regardless of where they're from, has an equal opportunity to succeed. And it's from that upbringing and that core sense of belief in community and those values that I would bring to being governor. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. The next question is a two-part question. What actions would you take as governor to reduce energy and to make energy more efficient? And, Vermont Yankee notwithstanding, do you think that nuclear power has a role in Vermont's future?
My turn. I think we have incredible potential to reduce energy use in this state. Certainly through efficiency and conservation, we are showing that we can. We can help businesses, we can help families in their homes reduce their energy usage. We have a governor right now, and a lieutenant governor, who haven't really believed in it. And if I'm governor, we're going to have a state that's much more aggressive about reducing energy usage. It's also about public transportation. Really tough in a rural state, but it can't be ignored in terms of cutting down on the amount of fossil fuels we use. I don't believe that nuclear energy does have is part of our energy future. The problem I have with nuclear energy is that we as a society, that industry has not figured out what to do with its waste. And it's not right for this generation, in the pursuit of cheaper power, which may not be cheaper in the long run, it is not right to leave the waste to future generations for thousands of years. I think it's immoral.
I think that Vermont can lead the nation on efficiency. That's why we passed the toughest efficiency bill in the country. Our opportunity is to replace Vermont Yankees' power in 4 years through efficiency, and as governor, that will be my goal. Think about it. In the last offer from Entergy Louisiana, they offered us 11% of our power for 50% more than we're paying right now. If we can meet my goal of 3.5% efficiency a year for 4 years, we will replace that power. We will put dollars in Vermonters' pockets that's currently being spewed into the Gulf and other places to countries mostly that don't like us. And it will get us off our addiction to oil and make a contribution to a more livable planet. So I will launch the most aggressive efficiency program that any state has seen. In terms of nuclear, as a business person, I focus on things that we can achieve. I don't tend to waste a lot of time on things that I believe will never happen. There has not been a new nuclear power plant built in this country since 1970. If one is built anywhere else, I'd be happy to examine it for Vermont, but I don't think it will ever happen.
I don't believe there is a future for nuclear power in this state. I think efficiency really is the way to go, because the best energy is the energy that we don't use. And we took a big step last year when we took Efficiency Vermont, that everybody's familiar with, and you think about light bulbs when you think about Efficiency Vermont. And we're in the process of changing them to all fuels. Because one of their frustration over the years was going in to do things in people's houses and seeing all these other things that didn't have anything to do with electricity, but they couldn't do anything about it. So they will now become an all-fuels utility for us, and they will go in and they can now do complete energy audits. I think it would make a lot of sense for the state to subsidize for folks the cost of having an energy audit done. And Rutland has just gotten $4.5 million to go into efficiency and weatherization, not limiting it to low-income folks. So that's how we're gonna reduce what we're spending and keep a lot of money in people's pockets.
There's not a future for nuclear power in Vermont, and that doesn't actually have to do with nuclear power. It has to do with a company from out of state that lied to regulators and left us with tritium going into our groundwater and have soured any possibility of nuclear energy in the state of Vermont moving forward. In terms of efficiency, the cheapest megawatt is a negawatt. Our ability to use revenue bonding authority to capitalize up front to do the greatest investment in energy efficiency in the state of Vermont is a real possibility. It would not only make Vermont more affordable, but it would put the thousands of contractors that are out of work today back to work doing good jobs. We can do it. We must do it. It will also help us with innovation. We have innovators across Vermont, including a gentleman in St. Johnsbury who's figured out how to do a zero energy envelope. We need to be encouraging those innovators so they can share across the board. But if we want energy efficiency to be something that's thought about by all Vermonters, we need to give them access to information. All Vermonters should be able to see their energy use in real time. If they have that transparency and access to information, they will turn off the light in the attic and the heater in the garage and shave megawatts off our system, but we need to give them access to that information.
You know, energy efficiency is really exactly the kind of win-win-win we need right now. Investments in energy efficiency not only saves costs for families, but it creates jobs because you hire a lot of people to do the work, and it means that we don't have to worry about building nuclear power plants or keeping one open that may be dangerous for the state. So in my energy plan for Vermont, there's a big focus on energy efficiency. Net metering, you may have heard that all of our utilities have been given federal money under the Recovery Act to allow exactly what Matt was talking about, to allow consumers to have control over their demand for electricity. That's going to make a great difference for the folks in Vermont. And we actually already have a bonding mechanism in place to allow families and businesses to bond to help pay for it. Now what's missing is education. As governor, I'm going to be a leader to let folks know what every family, every business can do to take advantage of efficiency. And I also agree that nuclear is not part of Vermont's energy future.
Thank you. We invited the candidates in today's debate to take the opportunity to ask their fellow candidates one question. So starting with Peter Shumlin, he'll ask the candidates a question, all four will answer, and then we'll move down the row, and then when all have asked the question, they each have 30 seconds to rebut. Have at it.
Well, 8 years ago, I think it was 8 years ago, one of the smarter appointments that I was able to make as Senate President, or help to make as Senate President, was to make Susan Bartlett chair of Appropriations Committee. And I do believe she was the first woman in the state of Vermont to chair the most powerful money committee in the state. Susan, you're good at explaining complex budget issues, and when I talk to fellow Democrats and progressives, there's tremendous confusion about why we didn't tap out the rainy day funds. People ask, the money's there, it was our taxpayer money, we put it there, why on earth didn't you spend it? Could you explain that? Because I know you explain it well.
First of all, the rainy day funds aren't there. The rainy day funds are a budget stabilization reserve that we have used for years, and it's 5% of what the state budget is. And we have used that for years so that we don't have to do short-term borrowing. If we decide we want to spend it, here's what you do. All you have to do is get to the end of your fiscal year, and that money automatically flows in to fill a deficit. So it doesn't require us to take a proactive behavior to spend the money. So if this coming year, if Challenges for Change doesn't work, if a variety of things don't work, we don't have to make more reductions when we're back in Montpelier. We can just allow next June 30th for the rainy day funds, the budget stabilization funds, to roll right in and fill that hole.
Did you want the rest of the candidates to answer that, or just Susan?
I think she does a better job than anyone. So
Okay.
if anyone wants to add, go ahead. But it's a. I asked it only because it's so commonly misunderstood. You don't need authority to use the rainy day funds. It's in effect a reserve account.
So then it would become Susan's opportunity to ask her fellow candidates a question.
Okay. Peter, you neglected to introduce our sixth member of the committee. Yeah, well, we have, here's what, and this really is for all of us, and I'll be glad to answer it too. We're all Democrats, and Doobie's campaign is sent along and they're videoing every single one of these debates. And you can believe in this much public speaking, we have all put our foot in our mouth more than once, and we'll probably do it again. And we know from the past 8 years that the Republican response tends to be negative campaigning and to take things out of context. Since we're all Democrats, and everybody knows that Democrats are tax and spend and not responsible with money, how do you address, we've got to have a balance in the governor's office of a Republican, because if we don't, we're going to get tax and spend to death.
So, Matt, it's going to start with, well, it's always going to start with a candidate to the questioner's left.
Oh.
So that's you, Matt.
So the question is, how do we balance? Try it again.
How do you answer, we're all tax and spend,
Right.
and if we don't have a Republican as the governor, it's the end of Vermont?
Right, and I think the way that I've heard the question is this strange notion that we need balance. Right? That if you've got a Democratic House and Senate, which I think is very likely to have, that somehow you need a Republican governor to balance it out. And having served with Howard Dean, I know very well that in fact it does not matter the party stripe to make sure that you have someone who has the experience running an operation and running a budget to know that that person in the executive branch can be effective in working with the legislature and working through those difficult challenges. Having run a 6,000-person public enterprise, I have firsthand experience of having to live within a budget, having to put up with legislation that was passed by the legislative branch without thinking about the implications. And I have the experience of reaching out to the private sector to bring in more resources and making the organization much more efficient. So the argument that a governor of a Democratic nature is going to somehow run amok is just false, and history doesn't prove it, and you only need to look at Bill Clinton versus George Bush to know what the impact on the deficit can be.
Well, I have the benefit of being the only one up here without a voting record that could be pointed to. And that's a practical reality. My executive leadership record is a record of fiscal accountability, fiscal conservatism, and social liberalism. And I think that's what most Vermonters are looking for. Of everyone up here, I'm the only one who's actually managed a budget and had to cut waste. In doing it, I was able to find efficiencies that allowed me to reduce fees and eliminate some fees that our businesses used to have to pay. So I have a record that Vermonters have recognized and experienced. Anyone who used my office 12 years ago encountered red tape and bureaucracy and silly non-answers to important questions. And now when they call, they experience a culture of service. And I'll tell you, when I first took over, I'd get complaints in that first 6 months, and now my staff receive flowers. So I'm recognized as a different kind of Democrat, no offense, because of that stereotype. And I think that makes me very electable in this race.
Well, first of all, I'm going to point to my business background. I'm in the car business, and if anybody wants to know what a bad business climate looks like, I do, and we've had to deal with it. And that gives me experience that Brian Doobie doesn't have. But I'm going to go back, Susan, to your question and say, when Brian Doobie says that, I'm going to ask Vermonters, if you really, really like what's been going on the last 8 years, go for that kind of partisan balance. If you like the fact that we've been losing jobs even before this recession, vote for Brian Doobie. You know, if you like the fact that we don't have broadband access, if you like the fact that we don't have an energy plan that works, if you like to see elderly people have their support services cut, vote for that other guy. But if you want somebody who's going to be actively involved in the legislature, who's going to work with the leadership in the legislature to actually get this state moving forward, to get things done, not be a passive observer on the sidelines, but to actually get things done, then I'm the one you should be voting for. There will be balance. There's always balance between the executive and the legislative branches. That's the way it works.
And Susan, this is what I would say. Unlike Deb, I don't have the benefit of no record. I have the benefit of a record, and it's a much better record than Brian Dubie's. I'm fiscally conservative and socially liberal. I understand that government cannot take in $1.20 and spend $1.50. I fought as chair of finance to reduce the income tax, to reduce the sales tax from 6 to 5%, to get rid of the sales tax on shoes and clothing altogether, because I was watching my businesses up and down the Connecticut River get shot over to New Hampshire, and to follow other leads in agreeing with the Speaker this year to balance the budget without new taxes. Promise made, promise kept. Brian Dubie, on the other hand, was part of a team that, as soon as I left town 4 years ago, raised the sales tax from 5 to 6%, and has a record of not reducing taxes after 8 years in office. That's how I'll beat Brian Dubie. They have run this financial state into a rock. They cannot manage money. We can, we will, and we'll do it with a thoughtful tax policy that doesn't overburden Vermonters. I know Democrats don't necessarily want to hear that, but number one, it's true, and number two, we won't win this election without the middle. I can get the middle because I'm fiscally conservative.
So Matt, it's your turn to ask a question.
So one of the biggest issues this year was the so-called Challenges for Change process. And at the outset, Challenges for Change was meant to be a way to evaluate ways that we could do government more efficiently. The proposal was dropped fairly late in the process, and it caused a lot of concern and panic across the state of Vermont as it made an impact. It passed, it moved forward, but now there is an understanding that if the savings that were projected are not realized, that there is an opportunity for the administration, perhaps with or without the advice and consent of the Joint Fiscal Office, to make deeper cuts as they see fit. So my question is, where would you see cuts being acceptable or not? And would you be okay with, would you approve if the proposal is to reduce the state workforce further than it already has been?
Well, first let me say the whole Challenges for Change process is a perfect example of how we need to change the way we do business in Montpelier. The idea that in secret meetings, groups got together to come up with these top-down, one-size-fits-all solutions was shocking. One of the examples is there was a proposal to eliminate half of our local economic development corporations without bringing them to the table to talk about whether or not it'll actually work and if there are other ways to become more efficient or more effective. So as governor, one of the things I'm going to be doing is putting in place an office of planning. Actually, it existed in the past. I'm going to reinstitute the Office of Planning, Partnership, and Performance so that we stop this top-down decision and take advantage of all of the knowledge in our communities that'll help us. With respect to cuts, who knows what the future is going to bring? I'm going to try to avoid cuts to the workforce, but I do think there's opportunities to make savings, particularly in corrections. That's 10% of our budget, and that's where I'm going to be looking at first.
I think Challenges for Change is a good idea that went bad in the end. But the basic premise of it was to try to find ways to operate government more efficiently. I think it was oversold. I think the leadership and the governor, when they came out and said $38 million, were engaging in some wishful thinking. And in the end, those sorts of quote-unquote savings are not going to be achieved through efficiencies. So that leaves us a hole in the budget. The legislature left with an $8 million hole in the budget. That's why I voted against the budget. I don't believe that we can cut services any further than we have. We have a governor who says we didn't cut human services enough. And when you look at what he was proposing, it was support services for our elderly to help maintain independence. It was support services for those with disabilities to help them maintain their independence. It was support for young women with children, single moms usually getting back in the workforce. I actually proposed, and I'm proud to do it, and I'd do it again, using the rainy day funds to help fill that gap. That's tax dollars that were paid in when times were good, designed for times like this.
I think the challenges to change was a laudable goal, and I actually think it was done well, with the exception of when the administration came back and made extraordinarily bad recommendations on budget cuts that they wanted to make for years, as Deb just mentioned. But I think the Speaker and I, Susan and others, worked together to ensure that we set a goal of 38 million, that we should make it through efficiencies, and that if we don't, the rainy day funds are there to be utilized. But let's be clear about this. We have a $4 billion budget that the next governor is going to oversee. We can be much more efficient than we are right now. Government is notoriously inefficient. I believe that $38 million is not a big bite to take out of a $4 billion budget to find efficiencies. As a business person, I can think of many ways we could get more. Having said that, I would not make any more cuts to the state workforce. They are trying to privatize state government, this administration. I would go after the private contracts and the outside contracts, and I would rebuild the state workforce, rebuild morale, and rebuild dignity in our state government.
Challenges for change is actually a remarkably simple concept. It says, let's take government programs and let's figure out what outcomes we want. Let's figure out how to measure those outcomes. And then let's figure out the strategies to get to those outcomes. We started down the right path. This administration, and let me tell you how you change a conversation. When you want to get to the outcomes, and let's say about getting kids birth to pre-K, and you get everybody involved in that, and you sit down and say, what are the outcomes that we want to have for our kids in this state, for every single kid in this state? What is it that we want? And when you have that conversation, guess what? You almost always agree. So you say, okay, how do we measure these outcomes? And you figure out how we're going to measure these outcomes. And then what state government has to do, he says, is forget the 27 programs that we have. Let's focus all the dollars and the energy on the outcomes. And guess what's going to happen? You're going to get better outcomes and you're going to save money.
So this is a question for all. In retrospect, what about this legislative session would you have changed?
I would have started with a little leadership at the top, and that's why I'm running for governor, is to provide that leadership. I would like to see us have a governor who's willing to work with the legislature to actually get something done. I've worked with 4 governors now, and regardless of party, I've respected each one of those governors for setting a tone at the top of saying that we have issues that we have to deal with, and we need to come together in a bipartisan, tripartisan way to handle those issues. We've had a governor and a lieutenant governor who have been content to sit on the sidelines, watch things happen, throw stones at some of them, but never really set an agenda that Vermonters could get behind. I think it's about leadership, and we didn't have it in the governor's office this past year.
First, I'll say, Deb, to your question, I think we solved some really long-term problems in a bipartisan spirit, the Speaker, the Governor, myself, and the legislature, on teachers' retirement, restructuring the judiciary, on finding ways to reinvent government, issues that have evaded legislatures and governors for years, and we did it in a bipartisan manner. I think that's what Vermonters wanted. Having said that, my biggest concern is the health care bill. What I wanted in a health care bill was to hire a guy named Dr. Chow from Harvard Medical School to come up here and design a single-payer system so that when this next governor is elected, assuming that they're committed and they can get tough things done, we can actually pass a universal health care system that offers Vermonters what they should have in a basic developed society, a basic human right, a good health care plan. What we got instead was a bill that's bogged down with so much stuff that a lot of it I can't understand, and I've read it 16 times. We're getting 3 studies instead of 1. I would just like to have had a bill that says S88, which is the bill I sponsored, and I'm the only person on this panel who sponsored the single-payer bill, is going to hire Dr. Shao to design the system so that we can elect a governor who will get it implemented.
I have to say, and I agree with Doug, what's missing is the leadership. And what I am really worried about is as they are going out the door, their flagrant disregard for things that we put in the budget and said, here's what you need to do. And I'm going to go to, there was a big discussion in the Agency of Natural Resources. And there were two positions that deal with municipalities around planning and helping them make plans around conservation. We changed, and we very specifically put language in the budget. So instead of hiring 6 new game wardens, we'd only do 5 game wardens. And the money that was saved, we would use, and it's federal money that pays for these other 2 positions, so that we could keep those positions to help municipalities plan and deal with conservation. This administration has just riffed one of those positions, and their response to me was, you didn't write it properly. We got to be really careful for what they're trying to do on the way out the door.
Like Deb, I was not in the legislature this last session, but I would say that my biggest regret is not having been louder about the need for legislation for better transparency and for campaign finance reform. Trust in Montpelier is at an all-time low, whether you're a state employee or your people outside of the building. They have lost trust in our government, and many people have lost trust in our political process. We are ranked 49th out of 50th in government transparency in the country, below Alabama. That is not how you build back trust. The second is in campaign finance reform. Because of the radical Supreme Court decision that said that companies can spend as much as they want to affect the outcome of the election, we now could be the poster child, because Entergy Louisiana has a financial interest in who is the next governor. I suggested that we do legislation to use that Supreme Court decision to cap those companies that have a direct interest in the government. It didn't happen. I take responsibility for not having brought more people together to push hard enough, but as a result, we are all going to have to come together to push back on the deluge of money that is likely to come into the state to affect this next election.
And it's your turn, Doug.
Okay. My question is about property taxes, and not the usual question we get, what are you going to do to lower property taxes? My question is, what are you going to do to stop the transfer of responsibilities from the state government to the local government, which are driving up the property taxes? Issues such as mental health services, the underfunding of our school construction budget, other services that the state once took on and is now asking the schools to take on, driving up property taxes. And related to that, there was an effort this year, supported by my other 2 colleagues up here, to actually raise the property tax as a way of by 1 penny to help with the general fund problem. And I would ask if you thought that was a mistake and if that's something you would not do again. But the basic question is, what will you do to stop that shift to the local to school budgets?
Conference committee, and that's the way Ann Cummings and the Finance Committee voted it out, but we understood what we were going home with. That's what we went home with. Judge us by what we go home with, not by what we do to get there. Having said that, the Speaker and I overrode the governor's veto, the first budget in the country, budget in the history of Vermont to be overridden, because the governor wanted to shift the entire cost of the Teachers' Retirement Fund last year back to the local property taxpayers, not just last year, but every year going forward. That would have resulted in the biggest property tax increase in the history of Vermont. I have put my money where my mouth is as Senate President by ensuring that those costs didn't get shifted back. That's what the Doobie Douglas team wanted to do. We all worked together to make that happen as Democrats. It was one of our great victories, and I think that everyone on this panel would join us in ensuring that we don't balance Montpelier's budget problems on the backs of hardworking property taxpayers. That's a basic foundation of being a Democrat.
The fundamental problem with the cost of education is the rate of increase in spending is going up and has been going up faster than inflation for a number of years. The past couple of years, school boards have done their best to keep increases low. But if you look at the cumulative impact, it's the same problem we're facing with corrections, with healthcare, with a whole bunch of things. The only way we're going to not shift, and this is, again, I have a background in special education. Our schools have become the deep pockets for human services, and the kinds of problems that a lot of kids are coming to school today with are horrifying. And is the school a right door to get to that child and get to the family? Absolutely. Should property taxes be paying for those services? No, they shouldn't. We need to have clear guidelines about what in special education needs to be paid for by the federal government, what's being paid by the property tax, and then what services we need to shift back to the general fund.
The property tax should be our last resort. It is the most regressive. It's the ones that hits people in a way that they cannot respond, and it does not relate to their ability to pay. There are two pieces to this question. One is how do we reduce the cost of education? And I would say that the best way to do that is to consolidate supervisory unions. So we have fewer superintendents, we have greater collaboration across schools, that we invest in early childhood education to reduce special ed in the long term. And third is that we tackle healthcare costs by doing comprehensive healthcare reform, since that is the biggest driver in schools and at the state. We also need to make sure that we're running our state budget in order. We need to make sure that we are doing things like transforming the way we do technology to save money. We need to make sure that we are reducing our healthcare costs, and we need to make sure that we are reaching out to those on the front line, because there isn't a person who plows snow who doesn't know how we can save money in our transportation budget. We can do that as long as we have the trust and the leadership to make it happen.
Well, my priority as governor is to keep Vermont the best place to live and to work and to raise a family. And that means it needs to be affordable. And I do hear from Vermonters all around this state, whether you own a business or a second home or live here full-time and are a working family, that our property taxes are burdensome. There are things we can do. As a governor, my priority will be not to shift state costs onto our local communities. It's going to require looking at how we do special ed, but I also agree that we need to be focused on early childhood education, because we do know that early investment pays dividends across the lifetime of the child. We are facing a challenge in this state, though. It's a challenge of changing demographics. Right now, for every 4.5 kids in our system, there's one adult, and that's just not sustainable. So as governor, I'm going to be leading the effort to consolidate administration. With fewer supervisory unions, we can find efficiencies so that teachers can teach and students can learn, and we can afford to live in our homes and our communities.
Thank you for those questions, candidates. Starting with Peter Shumlin, you all have 30 seconds to rebut everything that's gone before. Go ahead. 30 seconds.
You mean all the questions that were asked?
All the candidates' questions.
I don't have anything to rebut. I think it's been a great discussion.
Thank you.
I'll go with Peter.
Yeah, I think it's a good discussion, and I think it was healthy to have us have the opportunity to ask questions.
And also, I've got nothing to add.
Well, actually, I do. Okay? You
can use all the time. Go ahead.
Well, 30 seconds. No, I'm going to disagree with Peter. He said he was disappointed in the health care bill. That came out of the committee I chair, and I think it was an absolutely essential step towards health care reform. It got us away from talking about it to actually doing something about it and asking that we be thoughtful and look at three possibilities of how we're going to provide universal access to health care for all Vermonters at an affordable cost. We've had a lot of talk, very little action until this year. I'm really proud that we took this step.
Given,
If I can just respond to that, and I don't want to get into a debate about that issue, but my concern about the bill is not that everyone didn't do a great job. It's that Dr. Shao said to me, listen, it's very difficult for me to get this job done when you're asking us to design three systems. Since we all know that insurance companies don't offer anything to the healthcare process, it baffles me that we simply didn't say, hey folks, it's high time we join the rest of the world in designing a single-payer healthcare system for Vermont. Let's ask Dr. Shao to do that for us and come back with the results without complicating it with all this other, what I call mumbo-jumbo. I just don't get it.
and if I could just provide a quick clarification, I think it was just not stated, and I don't think it was intentional, but there are two of us that have had executive management experience in the public sector. Deb's at the state level, mine at the federal level. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear.
Thank you, and thanks for those great questions of each other, and for being civil. We got a lot of great questions from the audience, and we winnowed them down to 3 that we think we can fit in the remaining time and still have time for closing statements. And I'll start with the first one, which is about the Vermont Public Service Board and how commercial wind projects are reviewed. For wind power solutions proposed for a ridgeline contained entirely within one town, do you support the idea that the townspeople should have the ultimate control over the scale, siting, and decision on whether to install the facility at all? And I believe, Susan, we're back to you.
And that's a big issue here in the Valley right now, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I think it is fundamentally, first, here's what we don't have. We don't have an energy plan. So we kind of go wherever people crop up and they're doing something. Up in Lowell, Green Mountain Power, and spent a lot of time and a lot of hours sitting at kitchen tables with folks talking to them about a major wind project. And they've gotten a green light in all the communities. They also still have at least 30 to 35% of the folks that are determined to stop them. We don't have a process. We don't have a policy. I believe it is fundamentally important that the folks, not only in the community, but in the surrounding communities, because this is something that has a profound impact on not just the community it's in, but in the entire community. And I think it's very important that we, A, develop an energy plan, but B, we develop a process that is clear and understandable and inclusive for all involved.
First of all, we're Vermonters, and so we believe in a process that includes communities. That's just who we are. But what we have not done as a state, whether it's in wind development or frankly any development at all, we have not gone through a process of saying where we should develop. We've only talked about where we can't and not set up a good way of being able to get to where we can. I think we all would agree we do not want wind turbines on the top of Camel's Hump. I do not. I do believe that we do want wind as part of our mix to do our part as part of the global economy to move forward in an effort to curb climate change and do right by our state. What I would do as governor is pull stakeholders together and determine where there is good wind resources, work together in the communities to thrash out where is good to build wind, and then facilitate as quickly as possible to allow those wind turbines to be built.
Well, I'm a very strong supporter of local control, and I believe that we're going to succeed in developing wind when it's community wind projects where the community is actually benefiting from the development. And we're seeing that already, some when you compare the project in Ira and the project in Lowell. We have a complicated process, though, for developing wind, and I was speaking with one of the women involved with developing the Sheffield process and the Sheffield wind farm, and she said to me, you know, Deb, I've done this in a lot of states before, and regulation, no matter where you go. But one thing I know is that we will never succeed in developing wind in a state where the governor is against it. And I'll be a governor that's supportive of wind. First thing I'll do, though, is bring stakeholders together to determine those areas of the state that are too sensitive for wind development and take those off the table. No one should waste their time in those areas. And then I'm going to create a very transparent and accountable process for making that decision of what projects are a go and what projects are not. And it will include a local public process.
I think we all support wind up here, and the reason that I do is that after conservation and efficiency, it is the energy source that we have out there that's going to have the least impact on our environment. And I understand there are aesthetic impacts, but those impacts, I believe, pale in comparison to the impacts of every other way of creating energy and producing energy in this state and in this country. So I think we have an obligation to make it work. As governor, I will support the type of process that Green Mountain Power went through. Susan referenced it in Lowell, where they went into the communities and they talked to the community members, they talked about what it was going to be like, and they asked the community for their approval. And there has to be something in it for that community, because they will pay the costs, even if it's only aesthetic. And if we can do it in an environmentally sound way, and some ridge lines are sensitive, and that has to be a consideration too, but it has to be a process that involves local citizens, and there has to be something in it for them. There needs to be a benefit.
And I agree with my colleagues on wind. I would do a three-point plan as governor. First, identify the areas of Vermont that are such precious natural resources that we would never build wind there. That won't take very long. Second, build wind and ensure that we only build wind when a town votes to have it. And third, a decommissioning fund with the money in place before the projects go up and a stated public policy that when those 400-foot towers that stick in the sky are 30% inefficient compared to other methods, we take them down. Now, as someone who grew up in Windham County, I understand sacrifices made for power. We have high-level nuclear waste on the banks of the Connecticut River and a floodplain there for thousands of years. We have tritium, cobalt, cesium in our ground right now. So I get that there's a sacrifice. I think that wind has a very bright future in Vermont, and it sure beats what we've got down in Windham County right now, owned by a company that can't tell the truth.
Thank you, candidates. The next question is very interesting. I'm curious as to how you will answer it. 10% of Vermonters support Vermont non-violently seceding from the Union. Would you support Vermont secession?
Where does come from? Who's up? Matt. Me. While I understand the instinct on occasion, I do not support seceding from the Union. And this has been something that has come up a few times in our discussion, and there's been arguments about decisions that are made in Washington that are frankly not in Vermont's best interest. But actually, my belief is that now more than ever, the country needs Vermont. It's not even the other way around, how much we need them. They need our leadership in renewable energy. They need our leadership in civil rights. They need our leadership in doing right by the economy without destroying our environment. So my opposition actually comes more from the fact that the rest of the country, if we have the right leadership, will follow our example.
I also very firmly say no. I am proud to be an American. This last election with electing Barack Obama was such an affirmation of our democratic process as a country. I was so proud. But I'll also tell you that, I was the president of the National Association of Secretaries of State. And so I got to talk to a lot of folks around the country. And it is amazing how much we are looked up at as leaders. We're national leaders in progressive election reform because some of the tough legislation I got through over my years in office. And our election system is used as a model for the rest of the country. They say, wait, you don't use touchscreen machines? How do you do it? And we're like that in many ways, and with the right to marry, whether or not it's our energy efficiency utility, the fact that we early invested in electric energy efficiency so that we've bent the cost curve and we've bent the use curve. So I think the country needs us, and I'll be a governor that continues our leadership for the rest of not just the country, but the world.
No, I'm going to disagree with that 10% of Vermonters who, I'm surprised it's that high, but if they think that we should secede, I'm going to disagree. It's tough enough that we're having to get passports to go into Canada. I don't want it to go into New York or Massachusetts or even New Hampshire, although maybe. But, I seriously, though, even though I and all of us at times seriously disagree with governmental policies and how our nation is represented overseas, I'm still proud to be an American. It's still it's a great country, and there's still people who want to come here because of who we are. And Vermont, I think we're all going to say it, Vermont can show some leadership. We always have. And I look forward to being a governor of a state that's going to continue to lead and show a better way to the rest of the country as one of the 50 states.
And I also think we shouldn't secede, and I agree with the comments made by my colleagues. I also agree with Matt that the rest of the country needs us. I'm not sure that we need them, and I'm not sure that we want to take over any other states. So let's just keep with what we got. And I agree with Doug, passports are a pain. Having said that, I do think that one of the distinctions between my style as governor and Brian Dubie's would be that I will stand up for what's right even when it's tough. And here's an example. I was outraged by the war in Iraq. And throughout the Bush administration, I thought it was one of the greatest injustices that I'd seen in my lifetime. Brian Dubie supported that war every step of the way. When I had the chance, I was the only legislative leader in the country to send a resolution to Congress asking them to hold impeachment hearings against George Bush, Colin Powell, Mr. Cheney, and the rest of the gang, to find out who had lied to whom, when, where, and why. It's that kind of leadership from a governor in Vermont that I think would be a positive thing for America. Stand up for what's right, ask the tough questions, and stand up when folks are lying in foreign policy and making very bad decisions for America.
Sounds to me as though we've decided we want to stay part of the Union. Except I think there were probably times during the Bush administration when you look at the wonderful federal delegation that we have that they may well have paid us to have left. But we've missed that chance. We stayed put, and I think that's important. In terms of what's happened in the past 8 years, and I think we all agree, certainly now, I think always, America has needed Vermont. We all live here, and sometimes I think we all spend too much time here, because what's really important is to get out of this state once in a while, and when you come back, you really realize how special we are. And while we're still leaders in a lot of things, one of the areas that we have really lost ground in the past 8 years with this administration, and I would fear for more years of this kind of administration, is on environmental issues. They are determined to do good sound bites, but to do horrible policy. And as governor, I would definitely change that.
Thank you, candidates. Your third question from the audience. Do you feel that there is something fundamentally wrong with the fact that the Vermont government is the largest employer in Vermont?
The question is, what are we doing with our government? We do have a great quality of life here in Vermont, and I keep thinking about our motto, it's freedom and unity. And that's my values, and that's really Vermont values, the idea that we value individual hard work, but we also recognize the importance of community, that we all do better when we work together. So, as Secretary of State these 12 years, I've been tough on waste. And as governor, I'm going to be tough on waste. The first thing I'm going to ask is, what are we doing and why? And I'll tell you a story. There's still a lot of waste in state government. Just about a year and a half ago, I took over the Public Records Division of state government, and it's in Middlesex, not too far from here. And we found a whole department, 9 employees, doing work that was outdated for 15 years. Believe it or not, they were microfilming records. In this digital age, it didn't make sense. I'm going to make sure that we go through state government with a fine-tooth comb so that the things that we're doing for the people of Vermont are the things that are needed to be done. So for me, it's not, is it too big, too little? It's what are we accomplishing and making sure that we're right-sized, doing the right things.
Actually, no, I don't think it's fundamentally wrong because Vermont state government has services to provide. I'd like to see IBM back to where they're the largest employer in the state of Vermont, however. But the important thing to remember is we're a state of small businesses. And that's what's most important. That's what's going to be most important to me, is to recognize that small businesses need help. We tend to focus on our large businesses, which is okay, which is important because they are important. They provide a lot of jobs. But in the last 8 years, it's been at the expense of our smaller businesses, and we need to find that kind of balance. I'm a small business person. Most of the people I'm talking to around the state, and whether they're working in the tourism industry or whether they're in agriculture, whether they're entrepreneurial, are small businesses, and they don't feel that the resources of the state are there to help them in the same way that they are if they are a larger business. So it's going to be an emphasis on small businesses. So in the end, I don't care if we have a very healthy business climate and very healthy small businesses employing tens of thousands of Vermonters.
And I agree that as a small business person, that the emphasis should be on the 90% of business in Vermont, which is small, that we need to help grow. But having said that, I don't think we should apologize for the fact that Vermont is the largest employer in the state, for the simple reason that there is no other business in Vermont, no other entity, that is asked to build our roads, maintain our roads, plow them when it snows and ices, keep our criminals locked up, take care of the old, those who need health insurance and can't afford it, take care of the mentally disabled, take care of our mental health patients at the state hospital, and the list goes on and on. We need a governor who reminds Vermonters that we have a social contract in Vermont, and we're proud of it, that we take care of our own, that we don't leave our most vulnerable behind, and that we provide state services for a fair, efficient, but very important process, which is keeping Vermont the best state in the country. These folks are trying to privatize state government. They're trying to pit Vermonters against state employees. It's a big mistake. It will cost us more if we go private. Let's rebuild our state government, return it to folks who feel good about their jobs and therefore do a good job for us.
In years in state government, this is probably the most, when I go out campaigning, finger wagging I get at me about this. Because do you know the size of state government in Vermont is almost the size it is in New Hampshire, and what are you going to do about it? I'm going, well, see, there's this fundamental issue. If you want to offer core services like taking care of the elderly, building roads, having a Secretary of State, they're just some sort of core size you got to have. That's it. That's the reality. And if you look at our numbers with other small states, we run right about the same. So that's the old, here's one of these, oh, you're bad people because government is bad. No, we aren't. We're a really good state because we care about doing things. And we care about doing them as efficiently and as cost-effectively as possible. And it does reinforce that we are the state of small businesses. You also might want to file away, if you look at K through 12 education, and if you look at a lot of communities, the biggest business in your community is your school system.
Having been in business for most of my career, I never evaluate how a business is doing by how many people we employ. I evaluate it on what is the return we are receiving. What is that return on investment? So anyone who throws out the number of state employees without talking about what are we getting back is not asking the right question. The second piece, though, is about the size of our businesses. And I, too, would love to have IBM grow to 10,000 employees and Husky to reach the projections that they originally had when they come here and hire tens of thousands of Vermonters. But what's most important is that we have an economy that can grow jobs, and they can grow jobs across the state. We right now do not have the infrastructure, really anywhere but in Chittenden County, to be able to grow jobs across the board. We need to make sure we have high-speed internet, transportation infrastructure, and access to capital to grow those jobs, like the software company I worked for that grew to 120 employees and $18 million in sales in Wilder, Vermont. We can do that, but right now we don't have the infrastructure and the leadership to make that happen.
Thank you, candidates. We're going to move into closing statements now, and I'd like you all to hold your applause until the end. And it's you, Peter.
How long? 1 minute. 1 minute. Thank you all for being here. I'm really enthusiastic about this campaign, and I think Vermonters are enthusiastic about embracing a different and a better future for themselves and for their families. And for me, it's about being optimistic, and it's about having a vision of moving this state forward. I am finding Vermonters out there every day who are just waiting for a new economy, waiting for new leadership so that they can say we are in control of our own destiny, we can determine what our future is going to look like. I am not going to be content to sit on the sidelines and just let things happen to me. Vermonters are also ready to continue to be environmentally conscious and have a clean environment and pay the price for doing that. We're also ready to continue to be a caring and compassionate state where we look out for our neighbors and we look out for folks who may need a little bit of help along the way. And I want to end by challenging all of you to get involved in this campaign. None of us do it alone. It's going to be a whole lot of people who share these values, share this vision, who want to make a change, and will make it happen in November. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming out. We have about 80 folks here today who've been good enough to come out and care about their state, care about their democracy, and listen to the five of us. And so we thank you. As you know, this is a tough choice for Democrats. You have seen this afternoon, as we've exhibited probably 40 or 50 times now, and probably do it 40 or 50 more times in the next couple of weeks, that we all would be good governors. The question for you is, who can win this time? How can the Democrats ensure, and progressives, that we're in charge of this state, the place that we love, the place that we care about? I'm asking you for your support for these reasons. First, I have proven to you as Senate President that I don't mind tough challenges, that I'll bring people together to get really difficult things done. That's what we need right now. Second, as a business person who grew a business from a very small company when I was 23 years old to one that's very successful now, I know how to create jobs. The person that convinces Vermonters that they can create jobs wins this election. And third, I very much ask for your help and your support for a candidate who is socially liberal, fiscally conservative, and can beat Brian Doobie this fall. Thank you.
Thank you all for being so patient. You're a good audience. As you see, it's sort of hard to lose. And we come back to the question is, who can beat Brian Doobie? And maybe in a discouraging way, a lot of folks aren't going to pay attention to any of this until we roll into October. So the question is who up here has the appeal to the average person in the supermarket, the average person in the gas station, who isn't a policy wonk, who's concerned about paying their taxes, keeping their jobs, problems they're having with the kids, what do I do with my mother-in-law? Who's going to appeal to those folks? I'm running because I believe that I'm the person with the pragmatic answers, the pragmatic solutions, and just from years of coming from a moderate county and succeeding in difficult elections, that I'm the person that average person out there is going to appeal to. So I'd appreciate your support, and I look forward to the rest of this campaign.
Thank you for coming out, because this is a very important election and an important opportunity, because Vermonters are ready for change. But I know from my experience of 11 years in the House and the Senate, having helped grow a Vermont-based software company, having overseen a 6,000-person public enterprise and transformed it into something ready for the 21st century, or my work today heading up community affairs for Google from downtown White River Junction, Vermont, that change doesn't come easily. It's going to take someone to both win in November, as well as to make the changes we need, that has the trust of Vermonters, the ability to communicate a message effectively across many different populations, and the experience in business and job creation and management, so that people know we can start on day one to move our state forward into a better place. The Vermonters from across the state that have come forward to be involved in this campaign has been exciting, from all walks of life. But the ones that I have found particularly extraordinary are those Vermonters who are no longer living in this state. We've had Vermonters who grew up here, left for a job, and are ready to come back to be involved in this campaign because they want to be a part of coming home. I hope you will all join at this extraordinary moment in our state's history. Thank you.
Well, as you know, because I've said it already a couple times, I'm running for governor because I think we need to get serious about creating jobs, moving our economy forward, while looking to the future to make sure we keep Vermont the best place for future generations to live and to work and to raise their families. And to do that, though, one of us here, we're going to have to beat Brian Doobie. And I'll tell you that I'm the person who can do that. There's already been a couple of polls out that show that I'm ahead of the pack when it comes to a head-to-head race with Doobie. And the reason is, of all the folks up here, I'm the only one who's won statewide 6 times. And in fact, in the last election, with a Republican and a progressive in the race, I won with almost 74% of the vote. I've won every single town in Vermont. And that's because my career has been devoted to helping people in all of our communities. You know, but that's not why you should support me. You should support me because I'm the best person for the job. Of the folks up here, I bring a special skill set. I know how to run government. And I'll tell you, whoever's inheriting state government from Douglas is inheriting a mess. So we're really going to need that as a state. I ask you to join my campaign, debforvermont.com. Thank you.
And thank you to all of our candidates for caring enough to run for governor of Vermont. Thank you, Derek and Christy, for your help today. And don't leave. We have one more item of business. Future Business Leaders of America has sold raffle tickets as you walked in, and we're going to draw the winning ticket right now. Hang on the edges of your seats.
Okay, the winning ticket is 610376. That's 610376.
And please see the FBLA table outside to collect your winnings. Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you.